Hey everyone, today's lesson is going to be over domain and kingdom characteristics. So, our learning objective is going to be we will compare and contrast the characteristics of the major taxonomic groups, which includes archaea domain, bacteria domain, protist kingdom, fungi kingdom, plant kingdom, and animal kingdom. So, please make sure that you have your journal in front of you for notes, but also make sure that you have the characteristics of domains and kingdoms graphic organizer in addition. So, this is going to be a really good summary of the information that we're going to be covering today and over the next couple of lessons. So, domain characteristics. Each of the three domains have unique characteristics that distinguish them from others. And normally, the domains, the main thing that we're going to start looking at is what are the different cell types. Okay, we're going to start very, very small that distinguishes them. So we're going to use this information to fill in the table on common characteristics for each domain. Now, when we get to eukarya, we're not going to dive into that a whole lot because I have a whole nother lesson specifically devoted to that. This is just going to be a brief overview of these domains. So we're going to start with domain archaea. So most people don't really know a whole lot about archaea. This is actually a newer domain that we have distinguished from bacteria. For the longest time, they were just in the same domain as bacteria. But there are some similarities in all archaea. They are prokaryotic, so they lack that nucleus. They're really small, similar to bacteria. They do have a cell wall. So we've talked about a cell wall is just an outer covering, even outside of the cell membrane, that provides them a little bit more structure. They're always unicellular, so very, very small organisms. They have a ribosomal structure that is similar to eukarya. So what that means is we know that ribosomes is where proteins are created. So this is one of the main things that distinguish them from bacteria. They have a ribosome or an organelle that is very similar to eukaryotes, which are going to be animals, plants, and things that we'll look at here in a moment. So because of that, they actually perform protein synthesis in a more closely related way to us than to bacteria. They do reproduce asexually, which means they can simply pass on all of their genetic material and just create another organism themselves. And they are heterotrophic, which means that they need to get food from another source. They can't just create their own food. Now, there are some characteristics that organisms in this group share, but not all of them necessarily have to have these characteristics. One of them is anaerobic cellular respiration producing methane. So, cellular respiration was our process that we talked about that happens in the mitochondria normally. Well, in these archaea, it's not happening there, but they perform it anaerobically, which means without oxygen, and it ultimately is going to create methane gas. We also know that archaea can be motile or non-motile. So they can either be moving or non-moving. So then we have domain bacteria. Now, some of the similarities in bacteria is they are also prokaryotic. Just like we said, this is the main thing that we've talked about this year for prokaryotes is just bacteria. They also have a cell wall. So they have an outer covering even outside their cell membrane that provides them a little bit more structure and support. They are unicellular, very small. They also, like archaea, reproduce asexually, so they don't need another organism in order to reproduce. Bacteria do have a unique ribosome structure, so they perform protein synthesis in a very different manner from archaea and eukarya, and that is one of the defining characteristics. And we do know that bacteria can be heterotrophic or autotrophic. So some of them do need to rely on other materials and nutrients for their food. Some are autotrophic, which means that they can create their own food through a process similar to photosynthesis in plants. And now, some of the characteristics that these organisms can have is they can be motile or non motile. So it does not, there is no defining characteristic because they can be either one of these options. And then the last domain that we're going to look at is eukarya. So this is the one that we've spent the most time talking about this year, and the one that we are most concerned about as scientists. So there are a couple similarities, and that is that they are all eukaryotic cells. So these are our cells that have a nucleus, they have other membrane-bound organelles, and are just simply more complex. Because they are eukaryotic cells, these are the ones that can go higher up those levels of organization. So we can get to things like tissues and organ systems, things that the prokaryotic cells cannot do on their own. And again, they have that ribosome structure similar to archaea. Since there are four kingdoms of eukaryotic cells, though, there is a lot that is different from each other, and this is going to be covered in a further lesson. At this point, the most important thing that you need to know is that they are eukaryotic cells, and then we will spend more time in the next lesson discussing, well, what distinguishes the four kingdoms of eukarya from each other. So that's it for this lesson. Go explore further.